Doctors, have you ever witnessed the meltdown of a birth that was clearly a result of a cheating spouse? What was the aftermath? Story 1. Not a doctor, but my best friend's stepbrother was that guy who found out he wasn't the father because the baby was black. I'll try to make it short. Dude had gone to rehab twice and was doing really well. He came back home for a weekend and fucked his ex-GF. Left and went back to his house states away to continue his newfound life. Got the call she was pregnant and dropped everything to come back and be a father. We were really worried he would relapse, but he was great. So 9 months of preparation goes by. He was going to be an awesome dad. All worried about relapsing were gone, and he seemed ready to become the best dad he could ever be. Baby comes out. Everybody's happy. Nurse takes him aside after a few minutes and says, "I want to ask you something. You do know that's not your kid, right?" He says, "What do you mean?" "Well, that baby is at least half black, but the pigments are probably going to really darken." So, he goes over to his ex-GF and asks if there's any ways what the nurse just told him is true. She starts sobbing and breaks down completely. Admits that she fucked a black guy right around time he came back. So he says, "All right, I'm glad you and the baby are healthy. Have a nice life." Walks into the waiting room where all the new grandparents are waiting. Cheers. Celebration. Everything good? Yep. Healthy baby. Healthy mom. I'm not the father. I'm out of here. And walked right out the fucking door. The girl's parents even wanted him to pay and support. He moved back to where he got his life back together and is doing incredibly well. But man, I wish he had all that time back. Story 2. My friend was a delivery nurse for the hospital that all high-risk pregnancies go to. They are extremely busy, and she has brought a lot of people into the world. She once delivered a baby in the parking lot by herself. This has come up on a weekly basis, but she shared the best story with us. A Caucasian couple come in, and the mother is in labor. When the dude is filling out paperwork, the mother takes the doctor aside. She tells him there is a chance that the baby may a different race than the father, and to let her know as soon as the baby is born. The baby is born. The doctor turns to the mother and announces loudly, "Congratulations on your white baby boy." Story 3. I hope I'm not too late. My mom is a labor and delivery nurse. One time, she had a patient whose parents were present during her stay at the hospital. The staff there have a whiteboard with some general information about the patients like blood type, time spent in the wing, and like how far along. This information is nameless for HIPAA reasons and instead has a patient's number. So this patient happened to be the only one in the wing at the time. Her father was walking back from the cafeteria at one point and noticed the board. He stopped one of the nurses and asked if the blood type for the patient on the board was correct. He knew his daughter was the only patient there. It was B+. The nurse confirmed it was correct. Turns out he knew his and his wife's blood type. He was O+, and his wife was A. This combination will never yield a B+ baby. He brings his wife out and just points at the board, and this look of shock washes over her. TLDR. Father of patient in labor finds out his wife cuckolded him 25 years later by knowing his blood type Punnett squares. Story 4. My friend told me this story of hers. Woman and her husband were having their first child, and it was the friend's first ever delivery. OB-GYN. When she got the baby out, she looked at it, then looked at the parents and asked, "Okay, which of you has 6 fingers?" The mother broke down crying, yelling, "I'm sorry," to the husband. Their neighbor apparently had 6 fingers. Story 5. A patient asked if both possible fathers could be in her C-section so that neither would miss the birth of his child. They'd figure out the details later. Story 6. My parents' cat had 5 kittens. 2 all black, 3 all orange. There is a black male stray and an orange male stray in the neighborhood. She looked a little ashamed, maybe. Story 7. I'm not a doctor, but when my godson was born, the nurse told us about this guy who had gotten 2 girls pregnant at the same time. They both wound up at that hospital just down the hall from each other, giving birth hours apart. What a lucky guy. Story 8. It wasn't at the birth, but I used to work for a urologist who did vasectomies. He did a VS on a guy, then did the requisite 3-month and 6-month semen analysis follow-up test to make sure it worked. The 6-month test showed no Y, so the guy was all set to not father children. Fast forward 2 years, and he calls my surgeon fuming, ranting and raving about how he fucked up the vasectomy and now his wife is pregnant. So Doc orders another semen analysis. Of course, it comes back totally negative. A very awkward conversation ensued in the exam room that I'd have paid anything to eavesdrop on. The best part is, the couple left the office pissed off, with the wife sticking to her story that she would never cheat on her husband, and the husband in complete denial that she'd ever lie about that. Last I heard, they were gearing up to sue or something, but I don't work there anymore, so I don't know what happened. Story 9. When my wife was born, she was very yellow, and the nurse quietly asked her mom about the paternity when her dad was out of the room. She was just born with a bad case of jaundice, and that nurse was an idiot. Story 10. These stories remind me of something I experienced firsthand the day after my son was born. Nurse. So your baby's blood type is A, wife? Like me. Nurse. And daddy. Me. No, I'm A+. Nurse. You must be mistaken. That combination isn't possible. Nurse. I'll leave you guys to it. Me. Pulls out phone and frantically Googles baby blood type combinations. The nurse was wrong. Story 11. This happened in my immediate family. My mother is white mix American, brown hair and green eyes, married a full-blooded Japanese man. My two younger brothers and I are very, very obviously half Jap. I got the black hair, brown eyes, and a slight cast to my eyes. My brothers look Jap as in the face, with brown hair, moms, and lighter eyes. After the third kid, things weren't going so hot with my mother and father. Lot of fights, lots of nights where I would wake up, at the age of 5, and find my dad slept on the couch. Mom gets pregs again, even though they only had once after my youngest brother was born. Their relationship continues to deteriorate during the pregnancy. The big day comes. Out comes my baby sister, last of the bunch. My sister was born white, with a shock of bright red hair and a very pale complexion, and no Jap features at all. My father's best friend was a tall Danish red-headed dude. It took my father about 36 hours to put 2 plus 2 together. He confronted my mother in the hospital, and she admitted she'd been fucking his best friend behind his back since before my youngest brother was born. Divorce happened not long after that. My father ran the away from all of that bullshit. Funny thing? I didn't realize my sister was from another father until I was 16 years old, and my girlfriend asked why my sister looked nothing like me and my brothers. I asked my mother, and got the full story. To this day, she's not my half-sister, she's my sister. We grew up together, and she my sis, I'm her eldest bro. But yeah, it ended the marriage, more or less on the spot. Story 12. I might be the first medical professional to post in this thread. Hot. So, I'm a NICU nurse that was floating to the nursery. A baby was born with a genetic abnormality, had one missing limb, but was otherwise doing fine. The pediatrician was in the parents' room discussing with them the follow-up type stuff for the baby, appointments with a geneticist, an orthopedic surgeon, etc. At some point in the conversation, the mother asked what the baby's blood type was, to which the pediatrician responded, A+. The father of the baby insisted that was impossible, as he and his wife, this was their third baby, were both O. The pediatrician got totally flustered and came back to the nursery to verify the lab results. Baby really was A+. We even went so far as to redraw the baby's blood and retest it. Nope, A+. There is absolutely no chance that the baby belonged to that man. The husband left the hospital soon after and didn't show up again until it was time to pick up the mom and baby to bring them home. The mom spent the rest of the hospital stay lying alone, in the dark, mostly hiding under the covers. Story 13. Ironically enough, I'm reading this from the maternity ward right now. 7lub5 Oz. Looks like me, thank God. Edit. Thanks for all the congrats. I was only kidding before. My wife is the most wonderful and faithful woman ever. She suffered through 24 hours of labor for my little man to be here. So far it's exhausting, but every second with my son is worth it. Story 14. Not a doctor, but still a relevant story. When I was born, my father was 100% certain that I was not his, because his blood type and my mom's blood type couldn't have produced me. He punched a hole in the wall in the hospital and yelled at my mom refusing to sign the birth certificate because I have A+ blood, my mom has 0 neg, and he was positive that he had AB neg because that's what his brand new dog tag said. He was in the army at the time. Turns out they misprinted his dog tags. All his old tags said A positive. The ultra typo on my dad's army-issued dog tags almost caused my parents to divorce. Edit. Words are hard before coffee. Story 15. I heard this from an old client who was an obstetrician. He was telling me stories about when he used to deliver babies at people's homes way back in the day. This was probably 15 years ago when he told me this story, and he was in his 80s, 83 IIRC. Anyway, he was telling me about his son, and I asked if he delivered his own son. He said yes and told me the most amazing, heartbreaking, and heartwarming story. In the late 40s, the town ambulance Charn Hearse taxi pulls up at his little independent practice out in the boonies of Illinois. A volunteer firefighter comes in and says they have a lady in labor and they won't make it to the hospital, which is over an hour away. He tells them to bring her in. He delivers the baby, and mom passes out. They clean her up, they clean up the baby, and all seems normal. Mom wakes up and the doctor comes in to give her the baby. She starts screaming, "Get it away from me!" He's all confused and can't figure out what's going on. She keeps flailing around and screaming that she doesn't want to look at it. The doc takes the baby out and comes back. She's calmer but still looks frantic or terrified. He talks to her and she just stares at him like he's got 9 heads. He finally asks, "Well, what do you want me to do with your son?" The mom stays silent for a long time, and as he's getting up to leave, she quietly says, "Can you get rid of him?" The doc asks what she means. She says, "You know, maybe just make him go to sleep so he won't wake up." He said it took everything for him to not beat this woman to death right then and there. He went off on a tangent about how much he loved his work working with all the new mothers in all these little towns full of salt-of-the-earth people with great family values. On and on about how happy it made him bringing life into the world, and this woman wanted him to murder her baby. He asked why, and she ends up saying that her husband is in the military and it's not his baby. She couldn't let him find out. He kind of understood her rationale for not letting her husband know. But murder? So he suggested family, an orphanage, and other options back then, none of which seemed appealing in my mind. She said no to all of them because she couldn't risk this coming back to haunt her. He told her he'd see what he could do and he let her rest. The next day, he tried to talk to her again and she was just more adamant about making it sleep. She said she wanted to hold her baby. He refused since he thought she'd try to kill him herself. She went nuts. In the end, he sent her home and told her that he'd given the baby to his brother, who was a pastor, and was unable to have children. He promised he'd never tell anyone, even the kid, who she was. Then he said he taught her a lesson. If she ever found herself pregnant again, she would come to him whether it was her husband's or not. If he ever found out she went elsewhere, he'd tell everyone the story. He said he did this because he was afraid she'd get knocked up and kill the next one. And he knew he'd find out if she went elsewhere because he was the only baby doctor for 5 towns around and knew other docs at the hospitals. Of course, she could have delivered at home on her own, now that I think about it. She never had any other kids, as far as the doc knew, and he said he did check up on her once or twice with his colleagues. Supposedly, she died from a drug overdose a few years later. The doctor and his wife raised that baby as their own son. His wife wasn't able to have kids. The pastor brother was BS, just to make her think he'd already given the baby away. He eventually told his son a very watered-down version of the story when the kid was older. The kid ended up becoming a plastic surgeon and has like 9 kids of his own. He's doing very well, he's very happy, and he probably never would have had a shot had that small-town fireman tried to press onto the hospital and wound up delivering the kid in the middle of nowhere. He was convinced she would have delivered and then smothered the baby by the time they got to the hospital. TLDR. Lady gets pregnant by another man. Her husband has no idea because he's in the military. She ends up at a small-town doctor and wants the doc to kill the baby so her husband doesn't find out. Doc raises the baby with his barren wife, and the baby grows up to be a brilliant surgeon who gives the doc tons of grandkids and a huge family he never would have had otherwise. Edit. Corrected, incorrect autocorrects. Edit 2. Someone messaged me with a ER that happened attitude and asked what kind of client tells stories like this. I'm a real estate broker. The doc's son works up here in Chicago. After the doc's wife passed away, he sold his house in southern Illinois, and I was helping him find a new home up near the city because he wanted to be closer to his son and grandchildren. When you're showing houses, you've got a lot of time to talk to your clients and trade stories. I've probably got a story for every situation and every topic because of my work. Story 16. I volunteered at a hospital and a Mexican couple had a very black baby. The guy was pissed and basically said it was while he was in jail, wasn't it? Story 17. My parents both have blood type O+, while mine is A+. I asked my mom about it when I was learning the basics of genetics in the 6th grade, and she said that the doctor had told her it was some sort of rare mutation. However, now that I'm older and have remembered it, I'm going to ask her about it again, since I'm pretty sure that my dad wouldn't know the importance of blood types, and I'm positive my mom would have lied in order to make sure I had a good dad. Update. My mom texted me back. According to her, both she and my dad are definitely type O+, so there goes the forgetting of the blood type theory. Apparently, my dad did know enough at the time of my birth to request a DNA test before he signed the birth certificate, and it came back as a 99.8% match, which he only told my mother about after the fact. The cool part is that the same thing supposedly happened with my paternal grandmother, who also had type A blood, but was conceived by 2 type O parents. There is always a small chance that my mother is being untruthful, but I don't see why she would be at this point since I'm grown. Plus, my dad and I share similar physical features. I hope y'all enjoyed the update. Update 2. Thank you to whomever gilded me. Story 18. Not exactly what you're looking for, but made me think of another story. I used to work as a loan officer at a bank, and one of my coworkers was helping a woman dispute some charges on her account. She was going through the charges and she was saying, "We haven't bought anything at a jewelry store, and I haven't gotten any flowers from my husband, and I certainly haven't gotten any lingerie or a night at a nice hotel. All these charges must be fraudulent." My coworker was very gently trying to tell her that the charges were made with her husband's card. Did she check with him? Is she sure no one made those purchases, etc.? You could see the realization come over the woman's face, and she slammed her hands down on the desk and started screaming, "I'm gonna kill that son of a—" Security escorted her out, and a few days later the husband was in, asking to open a separate account. What in Story 19? This is fun. My wife's cousin's third came out black. She's married to the pastiest Irish guy you can find. Their marriage did not end, but this has created an interesting story. Grandma tells everyone that he is just really Native American. Her husband was 1 to 2 Native. He is now 15, and still, no one in the family will admit that he's black. Story 20. My husband raised a kid that was very obviously not his. Kid was born and was half back, and he kept his cool. Went outside to smoke a cigarette and throw up. Married the woman, had another kid, this time his. Got divorced when the second kid was 2. Lots of ups and downs with the first kid. She turns 20 this year and they get along pretty well right now. Story 21. My aunt is white, and so was her husband. He passed a while ago. When they finally had a kid, my cousin was black. The family decided to ignore it, my uncle included. This was in 1989, and to gain my young teen cooperation, I got an early Xmas gift, a Sega Genesis. Love my cousin. Story 22. I wouldn't be surprised if the doctor who delivered me, and my sister 3 years prior, didn't write here saying, "Indian dad, white mum, kid came out white, mum definitely cheated." But the dad must having been having a meltdown on the inside. Although, I've looked it up out of curiosity, and apparently skin color is a genetic lottery when the parents are of different races. Edit. I'm beginning to understand the phrase RIP inbox. L. Story 23. I'm blonde, and the hubs is ginger. Our daughter came out with black hair and jaundiced, so she looked very Jersey Shore. Those first pics of us as a family are hilarious. After about 2 weeks, her hair turned to an auburn, and her skin tone is pale like us. Story 24. The worst meltdowns I ever saw had nothing to do with skin color. Some backwards cultures you had to call security if some poor lady gives birth to a girl. Story 25. A friend went through it. He went down a dark path of drugs, and we'd lost touch after a big fight about how he was fucked up all the time and he was wasting his life. He contacted me out of the blue to say that I was right. He needed to step up and be responsible, and that he had quit everything cold turkey because he was going to be a dad. Apparently, he was going to help his girl get sober, and they were going to have this kid and get married. He really got his together over the course of the pregnancy. He was clean, got a job, and got a nice place to live. She was not so dedicated. She continued to use meth, pills, and heroin throughout the pregnancy. She ended up going into labor early at 26 weeks. She gave birth to a premature addicted baby boy. He went directly into the NICU. She stayed in the hospital and visited the NICU until she was released. She then disappeared. She never visited the baby, never called to check on it, didn't go home, just fell off the face of the planet. He, however, spent every spare second at the NICU with that baby. However, as the weeks passed, it became pretty obvious that the baby wasn't his, as skin tone evened out and hair came in. Chick was blonde with blue eyes. My friend is super pale blonde with blue eyes. The baby was clearly half Hispanic. He wanted to adopt the baby, but they wouldn't let him. The state took it, and it went into foster care. It totally fucked him up for a long time. He relapsed for a while and got into a bad car accident. He spent some time in the hospital and then got everything back together. He's married now to a really nice girl and rapidly had 4 kids that are his with another currently on the way. Story 26. Not me, but this was an odd one that I heard because I casually knew one of the parents, the father to be exact. He came in freaking out because his wife had a kid. Well, he was white. She was white. Kid was born a dark mulatto. He instantly dumps her and starts filing for divorce. She has no idea what happened. She forces a DNA test on him before she'll do anything. 3 months later, well, turned out it was his kid. Her parents, his parents, everyone, thinks he isn't. His mother apparently had a black grandmother, so the genes came through extra strong somehow in their kids so many generations down the line. Safe to say they are going through a lot of therapy. She never cheated on him and he never believed her despite all her serious protests. Been about a year now and it's better but still not perfect. Story 27. My dad was a doctor. He never told me about any meltdowns, but he told me they would deliver a lot of babies for unprepared parents. Teenagers, moms, and dads with obvious drug or alcohol problems, legal problems, etc., generally not ready to raise a kid. For every one of these risky couples, it was usually teen parents who were 16 or 17, he would take a picture of the new mom and dad together, holding the new baby a couple hours after the birth. And then a few weeks later, he would send the picture to them with a short note about how they will make great parents, and the baby is counting on them and just inspiring words in general. He has a whole photo album of the new moms and dads holding their baby in the delivery room when he was a doctor. And I have to say it is some outstanding photography. Amazing stuff. Story 28. Late to the party, but one of my colleagues in anesthesia once placed an epidural in a heavily tattooed lady. Apparently she had Steve's lunchbox tattooed above her vagina. She gave birth. The OB/GYN turned to the father in the room and said, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy stated, "My name isn't Steve." No meltdowns or anything, just an awkward moment. Story 29. I'm way late to the party with this one, but it's about my mum. She had my brother when she was only 16 and had a very hard birth with him. Back in that time, the husband wasn't allowed in the labor room, and my grandma was at work. When my brother was born, he got stuck, so they had to use forceps, and he was also jaundiced, so he looked like an Asian baby. My grandma turns up after work and is looking at all the babies in the room they were kept, and asks which one was her daughter's baby. The nurse points to my brother, and him looking all Asian. My grandma storms up to my mum on the ward and said, "Which Asian guy did you sleep with?" Well, my mum thought she was joking, so she said, "I don't know, it was too dark to see." My grandma then proceeded to hit my mum, until a nurse came in and explained. My brother is now 44 and as white can be. Edited. Changed my brother's age. He is 44, no, 43. Story 30. When I was in labor as our son was crowning, doctor said lots of black curly hair. Hubby chimed in with, "What color is he?" Lucky him, I was too busy to comprehend his joke. We're both white and lived in Atlanta, GA at the time. Son's hair turned blonde at about 3 months. He's pretty much a carbon copy of hubby. Story 31. Yes. Woman admitted to hospital on Christmas Eve with abdo pain after she fell over pissed as a YesCO routine pregnancy test was positive, and the doctor thought that she was either a bit plump or about 30 weeks pregnant, which she was oblivious to. Transferred to obstetrics due to ongoing pain which turned out to be contractions. Her sister comes in while I'm just writing in her notes, asks about her partner who apparently was on deployment with Army until a month ago. He is already on the way. He knew she was pregnant but not 30 weeks. He arrives, she pretty much just coughs, and out comes her baby, 8 weeks preterm but not bad condition considering. He quickly puts 2 and 2 together and realizes it's clearly not his. She genuinely doesn't even know what's happening as she is still drunk. He just leaves and I presume never went back now that he can see what a mess of a partner he has. Next day I review her on postnatal ward and she is discharged. Although her baby is staying in so she will as well, She asked me what happened. She has literally no idea she was pregnant, admits to having slept with someone but can't remember who, and doesn't remember her partner showing up and dumping her. I felt sorry for her and her child. She might see this as a massive wake-up call and turn her life around, but she had everything stacked against her. Single, unemployed mother with a baby she was totally unprepared for. Sorry, it's not really a funny story. We did call it the Christmas miracle, but that's about it. Story 32. There's a family at the elementary school my kids attend. They are Caucasian. They have 3 kids. The eldest is white, and the younger 2 are apparently mixed race. I saw this family for the first time at some school event, and we asked around discreetly to find out if they were adopted, but nobody knew. Then, a member of the mother's family moved to our neighborhood, and we asked about the situation. The story, I'm paraphrasing, is that the kids are not adopted, and they think the mother must be cheating. She has never admitted to her family that the kids have any other father, but it's pretty unbelievable looking at the kids and the dad. The dad stays home with the kids. They got divorced at one point, after the first suspect kid, I think, and then remarried, and then they had another kid. That doesn't look like him. Now, I believe I've heard that she's knocked up again. I wonder what color it will be. Story 33. Not a doctor and a bit late, but in my high school I was in the same class as 2 twins. Both were awesome at sports. I mean, junior world champions good. And a couple of months before we graduated, they apparently made a DNA test with their dad, as he suspected something wasn't right, as it had been revealed that their mom had had an affair in the early days. 2 weeks before graduation, the test came back showing that he wasn't their father. So he basically supported them their whole life, paid for all their travels with their sport and stuff, and then they aren't his daughters. Anyways, they split up during that summer, and now I don't know how close they are as I moved away. Story 34. Not a DR, but have a similar story to some people here. Met a girl when I was 19 who was always hanging out at my next-door neighbor's house. They were Mexicans. The first day I met her, we wound up sleeping together. Yes, I used protection every time. We dated for about a month, and during this time she made friends with some of my friends. What ended the relationship was that she thought one of my friends was now her bestie, and decided to tell her that the whole reason she was with me is that she got pregnant by one of the Mexicans next door and that her family is highly racist, so she knew that would not fly. She picked me as it appeared that I had my together, was repairing our building, selling computers, and had planned on lying to me and claiming it was mine. Turned out the day she found out she was pregnant was the day she decided to hook up with me and why she slept with me immediately, so the timeline could be blurred. My friend asked, "What if I notice that the kid is not pale white like mother and father are?" She replied that at that point she did not care, because she hoped she would get me on the hook to pay for things for the baby and everything else. And if I noticed and walked away, she was still winning by having those things. My friend immediately told her to go herself and told me ASAP about what was going to happen. You think this would end here, but it did not. She wound up informing her family she was pregnant, and that I was the father. They then proceed to lay a campaign of terror on me, because at this point they are considering me a deadbeat dad. They did not listen to me when I tried to explain who the father really was, because their daughter is not a liar. I got death threats from the father and brothers on regular basis, windows smashed out of my car, slashed tires. Pretty much scared to leave my place since they only lived 4 blocks away from me. During all this time, the Mexican family moved out of the area overnight, left owing the landlord several thousand in rent and a demolished rental house. I don't think anyone knew where they moved to, as even the landlord came over to our place asking many questions and trying to track them down for a lawsuit. After around the timeline the baby should have been born, the harassment from the family magically stopped, and I never heard or saw of them again. I can only assume they got the point when the kid was born. Story 35. Late to the party, and I am not a doctor, but I am white and my wife is black. I am frog belly fluorescent white. Think ginger light. My wife is earthy brown. No one would ever describe her as light-skinned. We have a daughter. She had a difficult labor, and our daughter was delivered via C-section. She did not really get to see our daughter immediately after delivery. Later in our room, she was dozing, and they brought our daughter in. My relatives and my wife's relatives all commented on how my daughter looked so much like me and was not even close to the pigmentation of my wife. So I carried my daughter over to my wife and gently woke her and showed her our daughter and said, "I do not think she's yours." We all had a good laugh. Story 36. I have this one friend who's always been kind of slower than most. It's a really unique situation. His brain uses 40–60% less oxygen than a normal adult male, and it's actually saved his life a few times. Anyway, a few years back he wound up in jail. Dude loves to smoke pot and cigs and drinks like a fish. And when he got out, his girlfriend was pregnant. Only problem was she was 6 months preggers, and he had been away for 7. It took the poor guy a little while to figure the math out, but when he did, he had a major and public blowout with his girl demanding she tell him who it was. Screaming, throwing stuff, all in front of a ton of people, me included. She finally caved, and it turned out the father was this greasy assistant trailer park supervisor that he had been friends with since he was a kid. It was pretty shocking for me and whoever else was watching, because everyone had known that guy to be gay for a long, long time. He was even in a committed relationship with the actual trailer park supervisor for years. I fell out of contact with my buddy when he went back to jail again, so I don't know what happened to any of them. But last I heard, the grandparents took custody of the baby, and the father ended up maiming himself pretty badly while trying to jump over an inflatable cheeseburger. Holy, did that guy love cheeseburgers. Story 37. Just dropping by to say y'all should read the short story Desiree's Baby, if this concept is interesting to you. Story 38. This will probably get buried, but here it is anyways. My GF's uncle, let's call him Jay, has 3 children, boy, girl, boy. The 2 oldest are brunette, olive-skinned, look very alike, and have very computational brains. They look very much like their father's children. The youngest child is blonde, fair-skinned, looks nothing like his siblings, and has almost no computational element to his brain. So right after this kid was born, Jay thought something about him was a bit different, just from the blonde hair and pale skin. He didn't immediately accuse his wife of infidelity, but his ears were pinned back. He ends up catching her having an affair within a short period. They reconcile their differences, but it only lasts so long. When their youngest kid is about 4, she leaves him for her partner in crime. He is the blondest, palest mofo of all time and works in real estate. Jay fights for custody of all 3 children and wins. He knows his second son isn't his, but he doesn't give a. He told my GF's mom that he always knew things didn't add up, but he will always love him as his son and treat him as such, even if there is no DNA shared between them. Story 39. Man, the worst thing in this thread seems to be divorce. You people won't believe the kind of that happens in some places if the baby comes out female or has obvious birth defects. A friend's mother has delivered a lot of kids in a lot of rural areas in India, and she has a load of horror stories, though mostly they happen after the family leaves the ward where the lady works. Story 40. This may get buried, but my family is of Portuguese and German heritage, so we have some super pale people in the family and some who tan insanely quickly. However, both my parents are pretty pale. I was the firstborn. Blue-eyed, red-haired, pale-skinned. The whitest white baby. 2 years later, my brother was born. Brown. Brown hair, eyes, and skin. My mom got so many postman jokes it wasn't even funny. She didn't cheat. My brother just happened to win the Portuguese genes. I guess this doesn't really belong here, but oh well. Story 41. This is sort of ancillary to the topic, but one of my dad's best friends when I was younger had a pretty unique situation. Growing up in a relatively diverse area, I didn't think much about this gentleman's son having very dark skin and bushy curly hair, despite him and his wife being very Caucasian. Years later, this friend of my father's came up in conversation. I asked my mother how old the kid was when they adopted him. After a pause, my mom tried to trot out a sob story about how a nurse obviously put the kid in the wrong bassinet, but that my father's pal, and his wife, decided to raise the kid as their own out of the kindness of their hearts. Even at my young age, I knew a steaming pile of sot when I heard it. I think my dad's pal was such a gullible stoner that he bought his wife's explanation for the ordeal. She clearly got a case of jungle fever and sought out some strange,